Kia ora, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora and welcome to another Aotearoa Circle webinar. As some of you know, I am Izzy Fennick, one of the guardians of the Circle in my role as Emerging Director. I think we've got another few guardians joining us today. If you've already joined, Larissa, kia ora, great to have you here. As you know, this session is talking about Mana Kai, our food system piece of mahi, and this has been a massive piece of work covering human health, the environment, social equity, and New Zealand's economics. There was absolutely nothing simple about undertaking the food system. So a massive thank you to everyone involved, Matt and Rangimarie, our co-chairs, and the leadership group, for which I think we've got a few dialing in today. Angela, I saw you already join us. Kia ora, Angela Clifford, Trish Malcolm, Leanne Marsh, Martin Workman, and Paul Harvey. I think I can see you all here with us today, so kia ora. And of course, a massive thank you to anyone else on this call who contributed from the over 150 organisations that we spoke to during this piece of work. This piece of work came out of the Fennick Forum, which the Circle hosted back in 2020. And this forum brought over 60 of New Zealand's public and private sector leaders together to discuss priority areas, specifically thinking about what do we want to understand might end up with some seriously negative, albeit unintended consequences when we build back from COVID when it comes to our natural resources. And our food system was identified as one of those critical areas. We recognized that we couldn't just focus on the food system from a purely environmental angle, despite the Circle's mission. So we committed to looking at it from a health, social, economic standpoint, as well as the natural resources that fuel it. So this made it an incredibly complicated and labor-intensive piece of work. And we know that we can't do transformation like this without some trade-offs, which we are acknowledging, but a significant amount of heart and soul has been poured into this work today. Here with me today is Matt Prichard from KPMG. Kia ora, Matt. As I said, Matt co-chaired this piece of mahi alongside Rangimarie Hunia. And we will be doing questions at the end of the session. So if you have a question, please feel free to pop it into the chat and you can ask Matt or I or Ian Proudfoot, who will also be joining us for questions towards the end of the session. Now, Matt, I know you're going to take us through some of the journey, so I'll stop talking and we can get into it. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Izzy. He mana kai e tōtu Aotearoa o te ao te hei mauri ora. Tuatahi ki te atua ko koe te kingi o ngā kingi te atua o ngā atua nō reira whakororia ki tōna ngā tapu. Tuarua ki te hunga mātei kua wheturangatia, haere atu rātou ki a rātou, tātou ki a tātou. Kia koe Vicky me te rōpū Mana Kai Leadership Group o tira ki te whānau o Aotearoa Circle, tēnei au ka mihi. No awa karengai hau, enare ke tāmaki makauru e noho ana, ko au te tiamana tuarua o te Mana Kai Leadership Group, ko Matt Prichard toko wengua, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Look, a really warm welcome to the wider Aotearoa Circle whānau for this update from the Mana Kai Workstream that the Circle has supported for the past 2 years. A particular welcome to you, Vicky, you, Izzy, and to the Mana Kai Leadership Group members who are on the webinar, and particularly Leanne from Agmart, who's financially supported this kaupapa through its journey. I'm Matt Prichard, and I am the Deputy Chair of the Leadership Group that has been working on this initiative for many months now. It's clear that I am the deputy and the less clever of the two chairs, as Rangimarie is clearly the boss and she's clever enough to have me delivering this update to you today. If you love the work when we get to the finish, then I'm proud to be associated with it. If you have serious issues with it, Rangimarie is the chair and I will put her contact details on the final slide for everybody. But all jokes aside, this has been a labour of love for all involved. And as Izzy started to describe, really, we started the work knowing that we were not the first country to do work on a strategy or framework for our national food system. and we had good access to that other work done by other countries and to experts, international experts who had worked on other countries' food strategies. But this leadership group took early decisions to make this a uniquely Aotearoa New Zealand piece of work, not to broadly adopt the approach or findings of another country and context. Secondly, to make this a system-wide piece of work, not an economic analysis of food production, which is the approach taken by some others. And thirdly, to ground our work in mātauranga Māori. And those decisions drove our approach to consultation and dialogue. They drove our development of the Mana Kai framework. At times, they drove the leadership group around the bend as we wrestled with the complexities of an end-to-end food system and all of the stakeholders and participants in that food system. Whilst some other countries have the complexity and tension that we have from the fact that our food system needs to not just feed ourselves, but is a really important backbone of our export economy, most of those countries chose to approach a food strategy as an economic production plan with a bit of environmental impact analysis overlaid and added in. Other countries which had less of an export earning food system and wrote strategies based on nutrition and feeding their population, but they either didn't have or didn't tackle the complex issues of food sovereignty and the place of food in their cultures. We thought we'd take on the whole complexity, so for that I am profoundly grateful to the leadership group you see on the screen. You can see for yourselves the diversity and depth that we have had in terms of the voices of science from Professor Boyd Swinburne and Jenny Webster Brown and others they have consulted or brought in to our discussion from time to time. The voice of our eaters from Angela Clifford, Emily Nafiaki Mafileo, and Trish Malcolm, and the networks that they have connected us to and brought into the discussion. The voices of farmers and producers and exporters from Paul Harvey, Rob Hewitt and Leanne through AgMart. And the voices of policymakers and government from Martin Wiseman and Chris Kerr most prominently, but they also have brought multiple agencies and other voices and perspectives into our work as we've progressed. We've also had substantial input and leadership through the process from a range of others. And in particular, I want to call out Che Wilson for the depth of mātauranga Māori that he injected into our framework and thinking at key stages. I also want to particularly acknowledge Ian Proudfoot and Jack Keys from KPMG, who've invested several hundred hours over and above their paid role to support the Secretariat work. And likewise, acknowledge both the energy and the cleverness actually injected by Izzy Fennick, Daniel Talbot, and the DNA design team who helped lead the consultation dialogues. So I think you can appreciate both the grunt that we've had from that group and the real diversity of perspectives that we've had at that leadership table. It's been a barrel of fun most of the time. I've already mentioned that we are 2 years deep on this work, which really does trace back to the Fennick Forum run by the Circle in June 2020. Our leadership group came together in late 2020 for the first time, and over the first part of 2021, the concept of Mana Kai and the framework associated with that was developed and gifted by Che Wilson and the KPMG team who did some work on it. Phase 2 over the second half of 2021 involved a broad consultation across stakeholders in the food system through a series of dialogues, and that work has been supplemented by further dialogues and leadership group distillation of those dialogues into the purpose and values work which we're launching. I'm very proud of the broad-based conversation that was achieved by the team through the dialogue phase. Over 30 substantial conversations were facilitated with 250 people participating, representing over 120 organisations in that initial wave of dialogues. And as Izzy mentioned, more since it's probably nearer 150 organisations and a huge range of perspectives captured. And I think that's fundamental to the validity of the output of the work if you're in this kind of food space. Those organisations gave us perspectives on Kai from the farming, fishing, environmental and waste elements of our land and water, the healthcare, community, food sovereignty, food security, education and eaters' perspectives, and the economic markets, manufacturing, processing, food waste, hospitality, tourism, food science, food banks, food rescue communities, all important voices if you're going to develop something that will represent a food system that we can also aspire to. Inevitably, that gave us a range of different visions out of those conversations, most being some kind of balance between feeding people and sustainability and economic benefits. And we had recurring themes that go back to that conundrum of being an economy that suffers food poverty despite producing an enormous amount of food that fuels our economic prosperity. And we had tensions between meeting the needs of humans versus those who prioritise meeting the needs of the environment. People who were focused on food being not affordable versus those who said food is affordable, but other challenges like housing costs and education failures are societal issues that are limiting access to healthy and nutritious food. People who brought an export focus, which brings prosperity, versus people who brought an export focus brings our problems and is one of the key drivers of our problems. Those who were focused on an organic and healthy sustainable system versus those who emphasised a technology-enabled, still healthy, sustainable system. Those who favoured top-down mandates as the way to change the system versus those who said grassroots initiatives will drive that change. Those who said government is responsible for social equity versus corporates have a role to play in social outcomes and our citizens too. Those who said our agricultural practices are world leading versus those who said our agricultural practices are damaging the whenua and moana. And those who said responsibility for health system outcomes lies with producers and marketers versus those who said no, health system outcomes are the responsibilities of consumers and eaters. From that, the leadership group, with guidance from Che Wilson, developed and released this three-part framework that balances mana o te taiao, the mana of the natural energy of the environment, and the parts of the environmental systems that interact and engage around food, with mana o te tangata, the mana of people from the harvesting and fair access to food, and Mana Kai, the mana of the food itself that comes from the sustenance and nutrition that it provides. There were some really cool light bulb moments for the leadership group in that process. For example, we had struggled with how to anchor our framework, with most Western country food strategies having some derivation of put people at the centre as being the right way to go about a food system discussion. In the 12 o'clock position on the taruki on the screen now, Che introduced the mātauranga Māori around the whakapapa relationship between the elements of the natural world and humanity, and the acknowledgement that humanity is the teina, the junior relation to the tuakana, the senior elements of the system that relate to the whenua, the moana, the awa, the land, the waterways and the forests. For the leadership group, this brilliantly moved us away from concepts of mankind exploiting finite natural resources towards a much more actually science-centered concept of the interrelationship and balance of those natural systems and our truly junior place in those systems. Fascinating for me that it took that mātauranga Māori perspective and wisdom to bring us back to a much more evidence-based science perspective on how food systems actually work. Just to the right of that, another key concept of the framework is ngā noina, or abundance, which recognises that our natural systems here in Aotearoa provide an abundance of kai for our needs, and our obligation to respect that abundance by sharing and trading local food resources so that abundance is shared and tasted by all. We've used the taruki, the traditional woven crayfish trap, as a symbol of the strength of those interwoven circular systems with all elements connected and codependent. In a layer more detailed than this illustration, we've developed a set of outcomes that feed off each of those 9 elements, and which can be articulated in the form of, I commit to an Aotearoa food system where ... around a whole range of those elements. Dozens of ideas for actions were raised during the dialogues, and the majority of those ideas related to scaling or accelerating existing initiatives, and highlighted that transitioning Aotearoa New Zealand's food system towards that envisaged in the Mana Kai framework will come from the efforts of many. The leadership group saw the opportunity for a prioritised Mana Kai actions being to connect organisations with similar values and aspirations to bring scale and fill gaps and accelerate the transition of our national food system. The leadership group agreed on a series of principles as they discussed and developed the actions included in the Mana Kai action plan. Those key principles included that Mana Kai is an inclusive way of thinking about the food system that we aspire to, and that the initiative is open to all, and as a consequence, there should be no barriers to those who choose to align with the purpose and values of the Mana Kai framework from initiating further actions beyond those in the priority action plan and connecting those to Mana Kai. Secondly, that the Mana Kai action plan should focus on a smaller number of actions that the leadership group consider have the ability to create significant momentum towards the food system that we believe New Zealand deserves. And that the actions identified should augment existing initiatives rather than replicate or replace or disrespect the work that's already underway across the country. Thirdly, that the actions included in a plan should be focused on areas where there's the potential for additional or greater collaboration amongst organisations to accelerate transformation, particularly organisations that would be unlikely to engage with each other without a targeted intervention. The aim, wherever possible, should be to supercharge what already exists. There are 9 elements to the Mana Kai framework and 23 distinct objectives in that layer below the 9. And therefore it was acknowledged that to ensure that the Mana Kai action plan drives action, it had to be limited to a focused group of actions. And as a consequence, there's no need for there to be a priority action for every one of the longer term future objectives that the Mana Kai framework suggests we should commit to and buy into. The leadership group needs to be clear for each action included in the plan who the sponsors responsible for taking the initiative forward are, and seeking to create the systems change that the Mana Kai framework articulates. While the initial Mana Kai action plan, which I'll show a summary of in a moment, includes 8 initial actions, it's recognised that the plan isn't static and new priorities will emerge over time. As a consequence, additional Mana Kai actions will likely be developed and socialised across the food system over time. The 8 actions included in the Mana Kai action plan have been grouped under our 3 focus areas of taiao, tangata and mātauranga. And the leadership group have also identified the broad time horizon for each of the proposed actions, from actions that can be initiated immediately through to those that have a longer period required for development of the collaborative goals and visions. Those 8 priority actions include, across the top, the Mana Kai Po, which is an initiative to develop a Te Ao Māori code of principles for New Zealand's food system participants, leveraging the Te Aki Promise model that we've seen work well in New Zealand on a different subject matter. The Pātaka Kai initiative is around an affordable, nutritious food network for Aotearoa New Zealand. The Mission-Led Science initiative is around research funding for mission-led food system science, leveraging the National Science Challenges model. The Healthy Sustainable Eating Guidelines Initiative is an initial focus on the development of healthy sustainable eating guidelines for institutions and households. There's an initiative there to elevate schools and their communities and broader food networks. And there's an initiative to start a national conversation exploring the pros and cons of modern biotechnologies in our food systems. The leadership group thinks that conversation is overdue, not that we're prejudging the outcome of that conversation. And there are 2 initiatives around ocean legacies and regenerating farming pathways on oceans. It's an exploration of new sources of food and environmental benefit from our oceans for the benefit of future generations. And on farming, it's practical pathways for regenerating food production, fusing mātauranga Māori and modern science knowledge. Each of those is being shaped up such that they outline the various roles involved in bringing them to life and have enough thinking inside them to be a koha, a gift, a head start gift to organisations that see themselves in those roles and who can collectively step up to take an action forward. Hoi anō, ka nui taku kōrero, mēnā te pātai hia mai. That's enough kōrero from me. I'm happy now to be joined by Izzy and Ian Proudfoot. And if there are any questions, fire away. If they're tricky questions, I'll throw to the others or defer them to Rangi Mārie or other leadership group members who I can see have joined the session. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Matt. Thank you so much for that presentation. I've got a question to start us off. When we think about the level of insight and depth and the number of tensions that were identified, it must have been a pretty challenging process to decide what action areas we were going to focus on and how. So could you tell us a little bit about how was it that the leadership group did go about deciding on what action areas to focus on?
Ian will give some detail of the work that the Secretariat had to do to filter, but we did start with a population of something like 70 proposed actions, and it's really easy to get to that number of perfectly valid, good ideas, all of which should be moved forward and all of which you could argue had a role to play in moving us towards that future vision of a food system that works better for the participants in the food system in Aotearoa. Ian, the criteria that we worked through to narrow them down and the way we've organised them?
Yeah. So the basic rationale we had is we didn't want to have 20 actions or 30 actions. On the basis the more actions that we have, the less likely it would be that things would happen. So it was really, and it would be fair to say we've made some false consolidations at times. It was trying to work out which of the actions have the most ability to drive collaborative behavior. And I think one of the key things when you look at the dialogue process that took place and the amount of feedback we received is the opportunity for Mana Kai is to connect people that often work within silos in the food system. And that was really core. We wanted something that didn't just come from one part of the food system, but would be better with multiple parts of the food system coming together, and particularly where those parts of the food system often didn't talk to each other. So if we could create, on the basis, if you create one area where people can work together, then that's going to create those serendipitous moments that will actually drive more change and accelerate change faster. Another key for us in terms of our conversations and our discussions was really trying to ensure that the actions that we've not yet completely settled on. Matt's given the list that we're working on, but that may still evolve and is still, we're still working through some of those issues. But it was really where we're doing something that augments to something that already exists. It's not about creating new things, not about creating new infrastructure, not about having plans to make plans and those sort of things, but about actually doing something tangible. And so, if we could connect across silos and be taking a tangible action, that's sort of been the key drivers for us in terms of how we've put together the action plan.
Kia ora. As someone who sat in on many of those discussions with New Zealand communities, that desire for transparency as an action point around what was happening and that ability to collaborate was something that we heard, again and again and again. So that sounds awesome. The other question that I think would be good to kind of dig into a little bit is, what has government's role been in this when we think about how much food touches I think when we looked at it, it was something like 30 of the agencies that sit around government. What has government's involvement been so far?
We've had a really constructive engagement by government in this kaupapa, and partly that's been through representation on the leadership group. You can never ignore the muscle that government brings to not just solving issues, but analysing and the depth of work that's possible when government is engaged in work. But outside of the direct representation on the leadership group, I think everybody on this webinar should appreciate, from my perspective, the amount of cross-agency collaboration that's occurring inside government on this issue and on a range of issues that I see being dealt with by government these days. It simply used to not happen, or it happened very clumsily, and that takes a lot of momentum and will and willingness to shift. And I'm very inspired, actually, about what's possible when a very large number of government agencies have engaged with this work and seeing themselves in some of those action items and their own agencies, but approaching it on a collective basis as government. Ian, can you prop me up with the number of government agencies that have been part of those conversations?
Yeah, well, Lizzie was pretty close with her 30 in terms of the number of government agencies with a material role in the food system. I think that figure is 31 we've worked out. But I would say we've probably engaged with about 15 to 20 agencies at different points throughout the process. Had some very useful feedback from many of the agencies in terms of where their priorities lie. I think one point that's important to make, Matt, is that obviously this is intended to be something that reflects our whole community, our whole society. So while government's input has been important, it's only been one of the factors and one of the contributors. So, I think where we're getting to is in most cases a strong alignment to overall the sort of aspirations that the government has for the country, but in some cases we may go a little bit further because we think our food system should be ambitious in terms of where we're targeting. But I think when you look at it, the role that not just the economic agencies play, but the health, social development, education, all of them have a critical role to play in working together to create a food system that is really effective for New Zealanders. And I agree with you, but we've definitely observed those connections being strengthened over the last 2 years. I think all New Zealanders recognise that we're only going to make our system move forward if it's the whole community that works together to achieve this, not just single agencies.
I can see an example of what happens when we build something that people can form around, because in the questions we've got a question from Brianna, and Brianna, I think you're offering to help write the eating guidelines. So Brianna has asked, fantastic kōrero, really interested in hearing more about the healthy sustainable eating guidelines and who will be involved in creating these. And Brianna is from public health. She's a public health dietitian for Auckland Regional Public Health Service.
On our leadership group, Brianna, it's Boyd Swinburne's area of expertise, but there's no concept that leadership group members will take priority actions away and do them by themselves. It's about us shaping it up and painting a picture of how that action and other actions might be taken forward, including a range of voices into each actions and roles and muscle needed around each of the actions. So there's plenty of room for people like yourself to put your hand up and say, I want to be part of that once we launch those priority actions. Kia ora.
And it's probably worth noting that action is one that we're still working, a lot of work going on in terms of how we frame that action at the moment. And it is evolving from being, just a development of existing guidelines into something that's much more about not just having the guidelines, but using the guidelines. And I think, we do have healthy eating guidelines, but one of the challenges that's been pointed out by many of the experts that we've talked to is we just don't apply them. So it's actually thinking to how can we then again bring it across silos, so we make sure it's being used in the education system, it's used in our health system, it's used right across the food system.
And I want to reassure you, Brianna, that, as this is still a work in process, Brianna, and anyone else that's listening and thinking, I'd love to lean in on one of those action areas, or I've got something to offer in this space, that as this is still a piece of work that's developing, when it does come to its formal launch, we'll definitely be creating opportunities to find the right person to talk to lean into. We are not going to create a black box with this piece of work. We're going to make sure it is open source for people to lean in and find the right person to connect to bring that to life. The other thing that I think would be quite interesting to talk a little bit about is we touched on how we needed to balance that social, environmental, health, economic tensions during the dialogues and the actions. And I wonder whether Ian and Matt, you might want to talk a little bit about how did we do that, and even maybe in those priority area spaces, what needs to get done now, what is a more of a long-term thing, and how some of those areas shaped up.
Yeah, well, the starting point was in the shape of the leadership group that we formed, and I am delighted really about the outcome that we got from the diversity of voice that we brought onto that leadership group and the balance that we had. In some of the dialogues that we've had in those different communities, there's been suspicion that maybe manufacturers and exporters are dominating because they're big corporates and they've got lots of resources, or there's not enough science in here, or the voices of the eaters aren't being heard or drowned out. Actually, that leadership group was shaped up pretty carefully so that those things were as balanced as they can be without having 100 people in a leadership group. And then the dialogues really democratized that and made sure with the range of communities that we heard from in those dialogues that those voices were being heard. So I think it's a pretty cool way to approach systems change. I think it doesn't always happen. I certainly think it made chairing the group harder because those people bring different experiences and different perspectives, and they quite rightly had to carefully listen to perspectives that were very different from theirs and the lived experiences that were very different from theirs. The other beautiful thing was that the people that we had on that leadership group had the character and the values to do just that, to recognise that they had a particular perspective and a particular lived experience and expertise to bring, but that theirs wasn't the only perspective. And that they were there by choice because they were willing to participate in something that was broad, that brought diverse perspectives, and that they were all learning from each other by the way they engaged in that process. So You know, huge thanks to the leadership group, those who supported the leadership group, and everybody who participated in the wider dialogues to get us to where we are today.
Kia ora, Matt. You did an incredible job chairing. We know that food, means a lot to people. There's a lot of aroha and identity in food. It wasn't a tactical or transactional leadership group. It was a very passionate leadership group. So you did a remarkable job, and that shows in the work that's being delivered. Not a statement, not a question, but a statement from Elaine Rush asking about, she couldn't see any Ministry of Health representatives involved, and yet they're the ones responsible for things like the Healthy Eating Guideline. So I just want to create an opportunity to reassure Elaine that while there wasn't one on the leadership group, we did have a corridor with representatives from the Ministry of Health to elicit what their thinking was in the space. And again, a lot of the people that we spoke to aren't on the leadership group list, but we spoke to, parts of the government that deal with the food and schools program and health and well-being sort of more generally. So don't take the leadership group as a direct representation of the groups that we spoke to. And we definitely spoke to the Ministry of Health as well. So thank you for that. Got a good question from Grant around Grant Hall around data. So what are the tangible data points to manage this initiative? We can only manage what we measure well. What is the process and how is it audited?
Ian, for me, that question goes to the layer below the layer that I included in the slides around the outcomes that the leadership group are proposing, are the Mana Kai vision for the food system that we aspire to, and they are all measurable and time bound and have been thought through in terms of whether there will be data with integrity to be able to measure progress on those. Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Matt. When you do see the full, what we call a wheel, the framework with the objectives around it, there are 23 objectives. Some of them are picking up existing metrics or measurements or ambitions for our food system, things like food waste. We're picking up and including the aspiration to reduce food waste by 50% as is already a goal for the food system as a whole. In other cases, we may be being slightly more bullish or slightly more ambitious in some of our reduction targets, but that's because we believe we should be more ambitious. And but again, we're putting numbers and measures and timeframes on those reductions or ambitions that we're setting. So I think that there is a measurement framework. One of the key questions that's come up in a number of our dialogues is around the quality of data. And it's fair to say in some cases we don't necessarily have the really high quality data we need. And if we can, by putting Mana Kai out there, start to drive improvements in data capture and recording, then I think that's a positive step as well. And some of the initiatives may inherently include a bit of focus on enhancing data recording across our food system.
Yeah, I just want to echo that, Ian, that one of the things that we definitely heard in the dialogues was the lack of quality data in this space. And I guess one of the things that we were really conscious of is we didn't want to let that stop us recognizing where good was still going to deliver good outcomes. So while we might not have all the answers to measure the data or know where we're starting, we know that we need to do things in certain areas. So we're going to lean into that and hope and set up programs to kind of backfill some of those data challenges. But I think one of the things that was really interesting from this work was how many times we heard, we don't have data for this, we don't have data for this, we don't have data for this. So it's a really important question. So we hope we can keep building that in this work as well. I've got another question coming through around the role of technology and innovation to empower the next phase of Mana Kai.
I think the first and most obvious answer to that is that action around the role of biotechnology in the New Zealand food production system, and the leadership group's view is that that's a conversation whose time has come to have at a national level again. It's a long time since that was a openly and hotly debated subject in New Zealand. The science has moved massively since that was the nationwide discussion. So our perspective is that it's time to have that conversation in its full form. Ian?
Yeah, I think if you look across many of the actions, science, innovation, technology is inherent across those actions. You know, where if you look at particularly some of the longer term ones like the Ocean Legacies proposal that we're putting forward, you know, that is about how do we sustainably use our oceans to you know, make a positive contribution to New Zealand, both in terms of our ability to produce food for ourselves and also to ensure that, you know, we protect and enhance our ocean environments. And, you know, that inherently connects with some of the other work the Circle's doing in terms of its sustainable seas program, but also it's about how do we find the best technology in the world to be leaders in ocean, you know, sustainable ocean use, because we are positioned to be in a position where we should be leading the world in that area. So I think a huge part of that will fall back into the investment into innovation, technology, research, development to enable us to do those sort of things. But I think you're right. The biotechnology conversation is really an important conversation that you know, wherever we're talking, whether it was around some of the dialogues we had or any conversation we're having around the food system, just the need to get a clear position on that to ensure that New Zealand has a direction in which we're traveling. It is important because it impacts, you know, so many other areas of what is the right technology for us to be bringing to the table. We've got to be clear on that vision. But also, I think when you do look at how we feed our 5 million and how we feed them sustainably in a world that is going to have to be responding to climate change, you look at what's going on around us at the moment, you know, in Europe, in the States, in Australia, in our own country, you know, in Nelson in the last few weeks. If we are not investing, if we're not keeping ourselves alert to the new technologies that are available, we won't be able to achieve that vision of feeding everybody in New Zealand sustainable, affordable, accessible food. So it's got to be part of the answer. We've got to be looking to do things better.
Kia ora, Ian. We've got a bit of a build-on question around data, which asks if we can share any more information around the data gaps that we identified in the food system from Renata. And Ian and Matt, you might have some of those specificities, but we heard it in just about every conversation. We heard it from the number of food insecurity we have in New Zealand, even to the number of funding that goes into food insecurity. There was few areas where we had a really good sense of the data that was in that space. Ian, is there any sort of specificities you want to add to that?
No, I think you're right. There's a huge amount of areas where there is the opportunity to improve data, even down to, you know, a number I'm regularly quoted, you know, that we can feed 40 million people from the food we produce in New Zealand. You know, it would be really good to get some real comprehensive analysis done to prove whether that figure is correct or not. You know, it's something that's become anecdotal. And we do rely on a lot of anecdotal numbers. I would say that the purpose and values document does talk to some of the themes where we had particular highlight in terms of a lack of information or where data could be enhanced or made clearer. So when we do bring out the full suite of Mana Kai, the culmination of the initiative, we will be talking to some of those areas specifically in that document.
I think we're running into the frustration and understandable frustration for some of the audiences, either today as an update session, not the launch, but the launch is not far away. So I think some of those questions around specific KPIs and data gaps and whether Strong will will be part of that launch, which is coming in the next 2 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see a question in here around the focus on mindset change, rather than some of those technology solutions. And again, when this does launch, you'll see there's a whole section in that mindset change that needs to happen, Brig. So kia ora, that's a great question. My last question, and then I'm going to start wrapping us up, Matt and Ian, is a little bit of a personal one, and that is, this has been such a massive piece of work and is incredibly complicated, and we know that when we look at systems change like this, there's a lot that makes it really hard. Matt, what are you worried about in terms of kind of the next phase or this piece of work landing?
That's a very negative way to.
What are you excited about? That's how I should have framed it.
Yeah, and I only push back because I am genuinely excited. I've had the benefit of being close to the work by the role that I've had and the leadership group that I've been part of, that I've waxed lyrical about already. They are all good, clever people. They are representative of many, many more good, clever people who share the same values, even if they come from completely different perspectives. I was delighted by the way they came together and were able to collaborate. And that has been my experience in New Zealand, is that big systems change things are possible because of the scale of our country and therefore the ability to form relationships, but B, the pretty common shared values that New Zealanders from all over the food system have when it comes to the vision that they have for the future. The other footnote that I'll give to that, if I can have 30 more seconds, is the more that different stakeholders from around the food system or any other major challenge in New Zealand, the more time they spend and the more depth that they get from engagement with Māori and Mātauranga Māori, I think the more value the country gets from that unique richness in New Zealand. And I gave an example in the description that I gave of how we came to a kind of founding principle for how the elements of the food system sit together. We had to be brought there. We were banging our heads against a brick wall about other countries' approaches to that, and the solution was right in front of us, and it was centuries old, and it was easily obtained if when we found the patience and the right depth of skill, this time in Che Wilson, but there are others who can bring that wisdom to this and other challenges that we've got going on. We have this richness and this deep wisdom, and we just need to bring it in to these challenges and be prepared to listen.
Kia ora, Matt. Ian, anything you want to add?
So I think for me, it was the fact that we've found common ground. And, I think when Vicky and myself started the journey and started to talk about who our leadership group could be, and we looked at the, I suppose the polar opposites, it was always that belief that there would be common ground, and that was what we could start to find, and look to see how we could build from that common ground. And the fact we've found it, the fact it's actually quite large, and the fact that it's fundamentally about ensuring that we feed New Zealanders well, we feed them while ensuring that our planet, our land, our oceans are here for future generations, and that we still use our ability to be a world-class food producer to create prosperity for our country is super exciting, because I think, I'm lucky, my role's global. I look at the global food system every day, and I can see that there is a real opportunity for New Zealand to do something quite spectacular but feeds our population while at the same time adding more value to the food that we do send overseas. And if we can do that, then it's wins for everybody. So I can't see anything coming out of this that doesn't help us move forward as a country.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. And anything I was worried about, Brianna has given the perfect example of why I shouldn't, that we, even in this brief call, we've got people that want to lean into this. And I've got Brianna's email address, so we'll be adding her to the list of contributors. But Ian and Matt, thank you so much for your time, not just today, but over the last 2 years. I know a lot of blood, sweat and tears, heart and soul has gone into this. And you should both be super proud, and lots of aroha to all the other leadership group members and any contributors to the mahi that are on this call. Thank you so much for everything that you've done to get us to this space. And thank you, Matt. That is all for today's session. Matt, would you mind closing us with a karakia?
Aye. Kia tau kia tātou katoa. Te ata whai o tō tātou ariki a ihu karaiti, me te araha o te atua, me te whiwhina tahitanga, ki te wairua tapu, ake, āmene.
Āmene, kia ora, Matt, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Ka kite.